We are going to move into, we thought it'd be fun to talk about holding space because our book of the book club that's coming up at our next community call, and I'll share that. You can always go log in and go into the forums area. The book club's in there, or the community calls, but here's our book club, The Art of Holding Space with Heather Plett. And Heather Plett, the author, will be joining us. So I'm really excited about that. She's a wonderful speaker and has a lot of really good, eloquent insight and ways of sharing story and understanding about holding space. I think it's just such a great topic and something so important for all of us as facilitators. So if you're able to check out the book, please do. And if you aren't, please still join us because it'll be great to hear Heather sharing and stuff. So we thought today's call, we'd talk about holding space a little bit and how it's incorporated into both the scene and the HERD Keystones. And so I'm going to go ahead and get our conversation started by turning it over to Fred, if that sounds good, Fred.
Sounds great. So welcome everybody. Ula and I really put together the Seen Through Horses course that focuses on the HERD Keystones, holding space being one of them. And so we had a little extra time to kind of explore this idea and this concept that's really been part of our facilitating and was a big part of the conversation and the creation of the ARCH framework of facilitation. So it's something we've been familiarizing ourselves with and building on for years. And so, as Lynn said, I think this is a nice opportunity to kind of have a conversation that's adjacent to and supportive of the conversation with Heather about her concept of holding space. So what I thought we'd do is, and Ula, by the way, is under the weather today, so I'm gonna fly a little bit solo, but really with the support of the whole Arch Creators team. So there'll be many voices, and yours are welcome to join in here. We will leave space for questions at the end, but if you have a comment or want us to pause on something, or you want to contribute an idea to any section here, feel free to weigh in, and you don't have to wait. So the idea is that I'm going to take us on a little bit of a tour of the Seen Through Horses course, specifically the Holding Space collection of lessons. I'm going to go in a little different order than the course does, just because I think this conversation warrants a different thing. So I'm going to pull that up on the screen and use that as kind of a jumping off point to talk through how we look at holding space and how we integrate it into our approach to facilitation. So let me pull that up. And we're starting out at the end of the chapter, partly because these supporting concepts also were inspiration. And so this idea that first we're looking for outcomes, where what is holding space there for? What is it? What are we hoping to create with it? And that the outcomes of holding space are trust, emotional safety, physical safety, and a productive space that sets the stage for deep work. That's a little bit why this is important to us and what we're hoping to accomplish. We also really leaned into, as trauma-informed principles became a bigger part of our practice, I think they really informed us as to both the importance of and a little bit of the shape of where holding space is, that it's a little bit of that way of being, and that it's a container for all these elements of trauma-informed care. These principles: safety, choice, collaboration, empowerment, and trustworthiness. So there's some information and resources on trauma-informed care, which many of you know we also did another course on called Healing Culture. And then you have Heather Plett's article here, a link to that, and these ideas that mindful, humble guidance, a container for complex emotions, being safe enough to fail, and so forth, that all these ideas are part of the bigger picture of holding space. And then you can see on the right here how this is sort of at the end, this is a conclusion of it from a course point of view. And so now we're going to jump to purpose. And purpose is starting to integrate this with facilitation instead of just an idea about something that's nice to have. How do we roll this into facilitation? And we have this description of it being a commitment to being responsible for creating and maintaining a therapeutically relevant space that's conducive to the intended work and has reasonable assurance for emotional and physical safety. So what I like about that, there's a number of things, but therapeutically relevant and intended work, conducive to the intended work, that's really what helps set the flexibility and the fluidity for this to be shaped to whatever it is the client and you are there to do. That it's not an absolute, and it's not a rigid thing. It is part of what's shaping the space that you are agreeing to share together for some purpose. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but as we go through, it being a container of sorts, it includes and supports many, if not all, the other keystones. But the idea itself and its role as a keystone in the HERD keystones has some elements that are unique and individual in a way. But it, like many others, it weaves into just about all of them. And I think when facilitators and a space are abundant with this concept of held space for people, is when a lot more things tend to be available and be present. Some of the other ideas and concepts and discoveries and insights become more likely to come forward in a space like that. And there again, the last sentence, they're just talking about opportunities of care, safety, and for clients to feel supported in reaching their objectives. So that's really the beginning. I'll open it up if any team members or people have something to weigh in, and we're going to go into roles and keystones next, which start to get a little more specific. So from the big idea of what's holding space all about and why does it matter to a group of facilitators, I would say these sections and what I just covered are kind of the big idea. Amanda, Lynn, or anybody else, do you guys care to weigh in?
I love just understanding the why it's so important, because holding space is kind of it feels like a kind of an abstract concept. And that's what I love about Heather Plett's book and the article that we share in this course that we'll show you guys too. That you're talking about, well, what does that really look like? And what does it really mean? And how do we really do it? And also understanding why it's so important. So yeah, thanks for doing that kind of overview of the why.
Yes, I agree. And I think the only thing I would add is thinking about holding space as a real sensory experience in addition to being all the other things that we've identified. And I know you're going to go into more of like what that looks like and with the horses and so forth, but there is the sense of listening and being and physically present sounds, et cetera, that can be supportive of that holding space. So.
Absolutely, great point. And I think it's also great timing, because when we go into roles here, recognize we're in the HERD, the Seen Through Horses course. So we're going to be talking about horse and horse professional roles. But prior to opening that up, this initial stuff, I think, really points out that this is any people sharing space, whether they're in a professional client role or whether it's just two people. If you're sharing space with another person, I think the more shared purpose you have together, like we're here to do something, then the more relevant and the more important this is. But I think it's a characteristic of shared space in general is, does the environment, do your actions, does your listening support support helping other people in that shared space feel present and able to be their whole selves and more likely to share. So I think depending on your role, depending on what is happening, your engagement and the specifics and what it includes will change.
Yeah, Rob mentioned you have the magic word with in sharing space. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about I wonder what the opposite of holding space is, and what does the opposite of holding space look like? Just, again, to have an understanding of holding space.
Well, it's funny, we were talking about it a little before the call, and and the reflections that are in the beginning of this course kind of help bring us to that, which is we wrote them in a way that said, what makes you either feel like you can focus and feel comfortable at home, and what feels distracting or disruptive to that comfort at home? And thinking of little things, it could be music in the other room, it could be I don't know, a noise, a door banging, or you think of these little things that could disrupt your sense of having space that's conducive to you. And I think that's one way to look for things that can contribute to it. Because when you say what is the opposite of it, I think, well, if I show up to something and I don't think somebody's either prepared for or concerned about my experience or my approach, I don't feel like space is held for me. I start to feel less comfortable, less like I belong, and less willing to take risk. Like I start to have one foot out. I'm gauging whether or not I'm staying or not, either whether that's emotionally or physically. And the more like it relates to hospitality to me. When you feel like somebody's expecting you and they make things easy, it doesn't mean everything's automatic. It just means, oh, I feel welcome, I feel cared for. Then the perspective shifts.
You
Is that-
know,
Go ahead.
yeah, this is Ulla talking. I just wanted to add the concept of hygge, which is a Danish concept of creating space. It's usually spoken of in social situations where you create hygge by creating a comfortable, cozy, inviting, friendly space. And recently I came across something that Dana Deb wrote about. Dana Deb kind of makes polyvagal theory accessible to the rest of us. She's a great author. And in one of her books, she mentioned that hygge was really creating small cues of safety. And that really blew my mind. It makes so much sense to me that what we're doing when we're preparing to see our clients or to hold space for a group is that we are creating small cues of safety all around, from ourselves and how we show up to the space that we're in. Anyway, that just came up for me. The hygge is kind of a concept that's taken off in America on social media, so you might come across it.
Thank you. So I'm gonna
Just real quick, sorry, Fred, I just want to acknowledge Rob with what he shared. And Rob, do you want to say more about what you were sharing in the chat? Oops. Oh, you're on mute, Rob. Sorry, there you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to see how to unmute myself with these new icons. So, that's width is where I am in the course, right? And so I think the language makes sense too, and just by considering the language, and remembering what we're being taught about the word width and what it means, we can add to that. Like if width is the ground, just like it says in the course, there's a lot of widths, and there's also opposites, like we just started talking about in sharing space. So you put them together and you have withholding. If the interest is in sharing space and we withhold, how much are we sharing space? Or if we need to, in a perfectly reasonable way, and we withdraw, you know, that becomes a way of moving away from sharing space too. So basically, I was just reflecting on the language and the bit more it can teach us.
Thank you. And I think this next section helps support that too, and recognizing that there are many other roles, but this is an opportunity to focus on some of the, sometimes they appear subtle because they're behind the scenes and they might be beforehand and they might be quiet, but they're not unimportant whatsoever. And so the horse and the horse professional. And when we talk about holding space, we think about the horses as listeners and viewers. And sometimes they might be the first readers, the first listeners to hear a story. And that the idea of holding space for that to happen may be the most important thing rather than a response or an action or something to do about that. And so this idea of holding space for this story to be shared and for our partners, the horses, to be this non-judgmental, emotionally safe audience who can provide this relevant, wordless response to what may be a vulnerable share for a client. And I think that really, to me, supports this idea of, it's an old cliche about less is more, but facilitation is sometimes holding space for that to happen and being quiet ourselves and being and not having to do in that moment. And in that case, I'll finish the horse professional roles, that using story language, and sometimes we move into, you know, book language or movie language, and seeing horse professionals as producers, that we're providing essential resources and support to make this work possible. It can be literal in terms of the horse and human space, in terms of horse care that leads up to that opportunity, and how the fencing and water and everything is organized so that horses and humans both feel comfortable. That can be, what time did the horses arrive there? Are they used to the space? Are they used to the grouping? Whatever it is, creating this environment for these multiple living beings to come together with purpose, when it feels comfortable, is often, it may not be listed, all the work may not be listed by the client. It just feels good and it feels safe. And so thinking about horse professional, this part of horse facilitation, being a horse professional, is we need to be the ones with the eyes and the preparation to think about what's going to provide that setting. Anybody want to weigh in there? There's a whole, you know, a whole nother path that you can go when you think about what does it take to prepare my herd, my space, my environment, to be conducive to this work and this client and that session. When we get into the keystone itself, how did I get here? Hold, please. We got into the E keystone, holding space keystone. Amanda, would you be interested in reading this keystone for us?
Sure. So, horses for emotional safety. Horses are a natural gauge for the concept of holding space. They have an immense capacity to receive and express emotional context without the spoken word and without judgment. As animals of prey, they gauge risk by seeking congruence and trust, developing a finely tuned sense of emotional and physical safety. They can be still and quiet, listening, hearing, and responding to subtle shifts in energy, allowing the story to unfold. We can model this inquisitive yet non-intrusive trait, providing a sense of safety and trustworthiness, which lowers defenses and empowers vulnerability helping people explore their own stories.
Thank you. So I think that has specifics, but it's also still more of this broad understanding, which is what I think a holding space lives within, is it's like providing for while simultaneously getting out of the way. And letting people have their experience. We also mentioned that this idea doesn't live in a single keystone or in a single moment or even a modality. It's not simply with horses. Lynn, do you want to take this moment to share about where it lives in the scene keystones?
Sure. Whoops. Yes. Whoops, wrong thing. Yeah, so we do talk about holding space and empowering facilitation. So in the foundation course, you can go to this section on the empowering mindset keystone, and we talk about empowering facilitation, which includes elements of how we engage with, there's the with one, a client that creates a safe and intentional space for clients' personal resources to be activated, to be who they are, to make uniquely personal decisions. And we outlined, well, how do we go about doing that? And that the different elements are here, which is our own sense of self and how we hold our curiosity and openness to possibilities, our collaborative mindset, intentional choice-oriented environment, that we're paying attention to the stages of change and the stage of the journey, and then holding space. And so you can go to the holding space area that touches on it, not as in depth as what's nicely been done in the HERD Keystones. But I thought this was interesting. One, just like in the HERD Keystones, also here. One is we do link to an article that Heather Plett wrote. So if you want to check it out, if you don't have time to read the book or and you want a taster of it, it's a wonderful blog article that came out in 2015. It actually went viral, which is really neat because I think it so nicely defines what it means to hold space. So definitely check that out if you haven't. Again, we're focusing on what Rob was talking about with width. I thought it was interesting here looking at what are blocks. And I think back to the opposite question I was asking earlier, this concept of a block to it would be holding to our own ideas instead of the space. And I thought that was interesting too, of thinking about the different widths, but also the different ways of holding. And, this concept of holding our ideas, holding our agendas, and how that impacts the concept of holding space. And all of this framed within an empowering mindset of one of the ways that we can look at how we create an empowering environment and experience. So I'll stop there and see if there's any thoughts on recognizing, like Fred was saying, it's held no matter where we are and what we're doing. And any other thoughts about this?
Well, I'd like to add one thing, that I think the empowering mindset part of this, and it connected with holding space, is one of the concepts that really helps us move to more of an equitable new paradigm of facilitating and helping people that's different than the expert, where somebody's coming to me and I'm the one that's going to solve the problem because I've got all the answers. This empowering mindset of believing in other living beings and the client, and that I think one of the ways that can be done is thinking, oh, we're here as a guide. We're here to set up some things that are going to be helpful for their path, rather than they've come to me because I'm the one that speaks horse or I'm the one that has the solutions. I think it's a great juxtaposition that helps us set aside that expert part of our ego. It's like a new way to focus, to say, we're here to create emotional and physical space that's safe and conducive. On that is all of a sudden empowering, whichever direction you go to get there.
I was just thinking too, Fred, you're sharing that, and the concept of holding is an action. It's something like if you hold something, it's concrete. I don't know, I was just thinking that it's interesting that sometimes it feels that holding space, it may feel like we're not doing very much, but that holding is as an action and an activity, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I made a note earlier, preparing for this, thinking about how it may be quiet and still, and that's not equivalent to passive. You know, that it may be represented by a moment of nothing, but it is not nothing to create that moment.
Hmm.
That started to get pretty trippy. Oh, nothing riddle.
Well, really, I mean, how do you hold space? I mean, space is this like, you know, and we put here space involves size, time, location, and distance. So, but it's like, wait, how do you hold space? So
You become
that gets
one with
trippy
it.
too.
You become one with it. How's that?
That's how you
Yeah.
hold it, becoming one
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah, become part of it.
So I think we'll move to facilitation questions, and there's lots of room here. We're leaning into the next section, just next opportunity being just questions and comments. But I don't think we're going to go through all these questions. There's 8 of them, but we'll hold them on the screen here. And I like this first one. We don't talk about a whole lot, but another acronym to remember by is preparation, resources, and observation. And you know, how are those things supporting the story? And this idea is the same way the scene keystones work, are things that we can actively be asking ourselves during a session. And it's not instead of or in place of the scene keystones, it's in addition to. And it might be how a team works, where might be an area of focus for the horse professional. And a little bit of a checklist at times, and some routines to build that are likely to contribute um, to held space for emotional, physical safety and conducive to the work. And so this gives you, I think, an opportunity to move from that ambiguity of, well, if it's the presence of nothing and quiet and peace, what do I do if it's not facilitating and asking the next great question? This gives you an idea of a way to move your thoughts forward and think productively and check in with yourself about what can I be checking in on to keep myself actively facilitating while providing space that may not have actions from me in it. Anybody have thoughts on these or particular questions that stand out to you?
You're talking about all of the questions, Fred?
Yeah,
Here?
any or
Okay.
all. Either have you been through these before, and do some stand out to you as particularly effective? Are there questions about any of them, or why we have facilitation questions instead of lists of things to do?
I kind of have been listening, and this is Ula again, and thinking about at the gathering in Minnesota where we created containers out of material material and glue, and how that really is a metaphor for holding space, because we create a container. And we had, I don't know how many people we had, 30 people sitting around a table making all different kinds of containers, and they all look different. And so like holding space is going to look different for each of us and each of our programs and each of our farms, and who we are as people is going to show up in that container that we create. And that process of creating these containers, it took 2 days. which is like, I'm thinking of that preparation part, like, you know, we start to prepare days in advance sometimes for a group coming. I have a group coming on Friday. I've been thinking about what am I doing for like days, because I can't seem to come up with it. I need an art project and I haven't quite come up with it. So it's been days of me thinking about what would make sense and what would fit this group. And
Yeah. And I think fitting the group is a great comment to make too, because each group is going to come with a different sensibility. And especially when you get into organizational development, you have the culture of the group versus an individual client and what their workplace may be like. And some of them aren't there because they signed up. They're there because their boss signed up. And so how that space is held for that group and what timing looks like and breaks look like and the depth that you go at what speed, all of that is going to be shaped around their energy as you learn it as well. It's not all in advance. Some of it's in the moment, and some of it's preparing the right amount in advance so that you can be in the moment. I wanted to take a moment with this number 5, because I felt like a lot of our discussion so far rightfully has been in this idea of creating and holding the space and kind of creating a sense of calm and safety. But I also like this one because it's important as to what might happen in the middle or later in a session, is that I think it's important to take a moment to be with your herd and observe the energy of what things are like prior to the arrival of clients and session, because it's your opportunity to create a comparative snapshot of what actions or activity or energy might be influenced through the clients being present. And we don't take this moment to sort of ground ourselves and say what before looks like. It may be harder to recognize client-born behavior from the horses who are trying to tell the story of the client. So this moment of grounding ourselves, but grounding to the herd, can be really helpful when it might be 10 minutes in. Sometimes certain clients have energy that the horses before they're out of their cars, the horses are starting to reflect that story. And so we're going to see those things more clearly and make whatever decisions we make from that insight, but we'll see them more clearly if we've checked in with our teammates and our co-facilitators prior to, with real intention about, okay, it's not qualitative, it's not good or bad, it's where are we, how you doing, what's up, however you phrase it with your horses. But I think that snapshot's really valuable.
I like that one too, Fred. I was thinking about that in terms of safety for the people who are there, and also, in terms of the safety of the horses. So there have been times when we had sessions that I removed horses from the session, and just because it was just too over the top for them energy wise. And I just wonder if that's something that you have experienced before. I be with my herd before the group comes in and evaluate them, but sometimes there are real intense things that are happening with the people that the horses need an exit. So I know that you and Ola do it in a way where you have an area where they're free to come into the arena and then they're free to leave through an open gate as well. So do you provide like an area where it's off limits, where the horse can have its space to kind of regroup? Or
Well, I think that what I'll say is that yes, we have made decisions where a horse where we decide to change the groupings in a way that some horses may not be present in the human space or may not be working that day. But I'll also say that this, I think, creates an opportunity for a lot of subtle insights before those decisions or on the way to them, that we have a little better reading of the landscape, so that we might be able to shape the experience and make some decisions that influence how the space is held that may be more subtle or before that. And so those are definitely included in it. And I think that everybody's space is different. So how that's done is, I think that's a great example of how holding space lives within the horse professional, is what horses should be here today? What can I do if I need to make a change? Do I have thoughts and plans and insights that let me make that decision, but also let me make changes somewhat subtly that respect everybody involved and have it feel smooth and supportive instead of a record scratch?
Mhm.
For us, one thing was this decision that's happened over the course of a year. We had one mini, Clara, who, can be a little tricky because she doesn't like being approached quickly. She doesn't like everybody approaching her. She doesn't like being approached at her head, and she can get demonstratively expressive about if you break those rules, she's going to tell you about it. And we really didn't want to put labels on her like biter, kicker, mean, whatever. And we also needed to kind of figure out how we were going to manage space if she was going to be in with clients. And over time, we started introducing her as, we put a ribbon on and said that means she has a day off. So if she approaches you, fine, but let's not approach her because it's her day off. And found that
Mhm.
wasn't entirely accurate because she was there and working. And so eventually we call it the introvert ribbon. And we may not do it every day with her. Part of the check-in may influence that. But so we put a ribbon on and in her mane instead of her tail. So it's not like the kicker ribbon. But we say, Claire's wearing an introvert ribbon because she's very selective about approach, and she doesn't like being approached so much, but she's willing to approach. So I imagine, some people like that, they still hang out with people, but they're sort of selective, and approach is very meaningful to her. So we're going to give her choice and let her choose when to approach. So it ends up letting people either see themselves or others in that characterization. And it has totally changed Clara's activity with people because she's not having people coming up saying, look at the cute mini. And so she doesn't have to swear at anybody. And she ends up making herself more available. And a lot of this was thinking about holding space and trauma-informed principles, not just in relationship to the client or the horse individually, but the space altogether. How can we do this that's therapeutically relevant, provides choice and safety to all, and also, in that case, creates physical safety as well as emotional safety. I think that was an example of something that combined a lot of these approaches, and we didn't get it the first attempt. There was months of sessions and then all of a sudden that felt like it didn't need any modification anymore. I felt
Yeah.
like we were advocating for Clara, and we watched other people in the group nod like, oh, yeah,
Mhm. They
I'm with
identified.
you, Clara. And all of a sudden they're bonding to her rather than being afraid she's going to bite them.
Mhm. Yeah, we had two
Now-
separate pastures. The one that we used, when I had adolescents out from the residential treatment center, and they would be in groups, and sometimes it could be real intense for a few of the horses. So we had a gate that they could go through into a totally separate pasture, and that was their timeout pasture. And a lot of times they would come back in again. So I think the kids understood that, that's their safe place to go. So it affected the kids in the same way, and gave them a sense of safety that they could, they didn't have to be involved in any particular thing or even be with the horses if they didn't want to. They could have their time out as well, or, safe place.
Yeah, and I think that's why we love and we have trauma-informed principles in the resources for holding space, because I think they're a great process to go through to think about how to change something or how to create more safety through choice and trust and empowerment. Using all these things and walking through them in conversation with your team and in relationship to any places where you felt a little unsure or stuck, either imagining a future, or sometimes it's a session that teaches us that that was uncomfortable. We need to figure out a modification from there. I think trauma-informed principles are a very helpful way to do that, instead of looking in sort of a blame or shame spiral of like, oh, that didn't go well. Trauma-informed principles immediately get you looking forward to how can we provide more choice? How can we provide, fill in the blank, more safety, more empowerment? And
Absolutely.
holding space is similar. So how would we hold space differently next time? Those are things that'll help you modify in a way that create space rather than defensiveness or nervousness. And we have
Right.
both inside us. And so I think these things that help us pivot are really helpful.
Right. I agree totally. Thank you.
And I think we're here at the question discussion part. So everybody's welcome to share an insight or a thought or a question.
As you were sharing that beautiful story, Fred, about Clara, I was just thinking about how part of holding space is, you know, that openness and holding that mindset of curiosity. Because what I heard you kind of almost illustrating is, rather than coming at it of can't do this, don't do this, stop doing that, it was like, well, what can we do? Like, it just changes the mindset right there of what are the possibilities and what can we do versus what can't we do. I don't know why that popped into my head. Thought I'd share that.
Oh, it's true. And it was even a curiosity about, instead of Clara's a biter, it was, why is Clara feeling she needs to do that in sessions? It was listening to it as conversation and saying, well, because, and then we were like, well, because people don't know her rules, her guidelines. She has a way she likes to be approached. And those of us that know her, we're not getting, we don't have any trouble. And so it's like, oh, so how would we cross that bridge? How would we create an environment where people would naturally be more likely to fit her guidelines of shared space? I was like, oh, and then it was a while before we got to introvert. And it's like, oh, that's not only likely where it's coming from with her, but it's also that providing her the choice is the thing that is her number one trigger. Is if you just walk into her space and haven't established any connection yet, she's like, no, that's not how this works.
It's asking that question from a trauma-informed lens of what happened to her versus what's wrong with her.
Exactly. And that's that
That
curiosity.
changes everything.
Yep. And instead of assuming that she's doing something wrong,
Yeah,
it's sort of adjacent and within what you're saying. And it's saying what happened and what is she saying is different than, we got to get her to do this differently. She's got to listen up. We were the ones that needed to listen. And Ula, I don't know if you're still here or want to share, but I mean, it's had a profound impact on how she engages in sessions, and she's much stronger. Well, I don't know about stronger. She's a much more present voice.
Yeah.
And the comfort level has shifted, and she engages in a wholly different way because we finally got people to hear her needs in terms of her space. And as a horse professional, that warms my heart because we're holding space for her as a co-facilitator as well as the client.
I would have to say that for me as a facilitator, that has also made a big difference because I'm not worried about her biting anybody or swearing at anybody, as you called it, right? Like, so it has helped me as a facilitator that we have found a way to hold space for her.
And I think if I were to tie that story back to the very beginning of this, when you're talking about holding space as a big idea and a concept with purpose rather than a list of things, it's like it's not the things that we did with Clara that are super relevant to everybody because your situation is going to be different. It's the listening. I feel like that's the relevant part of that story into holding space is we listened with curiosity and thought about the things that make up holding space. And then we figured out the plan. The specifics, I guess I'm saying, are really less important than that first part. And, you know, we got it wrong 3 or 4 times first, so it's not like we're patting ourselves on the back. But if you keep listening, eventually you'll hear. Anybody else?
I don't remember exactly what number 8 said on the holding space questions, but it had to do with regulate. I think something along those lines. But yeah, I think some of you know I just returned from what do all facilitators, human and horse, need in order to feel regulated, calm, and ready to hold space. So yeah, that stood out for me. I just returned from attending the training with the Polyvagal Equine Institute. Dr. Rebecca Bailey is one of the co-founders, and she did one of our community calls last year, February last year, if you want to go back and check that out. But anyway, as part of the polyvagal theory and paying attention to our nervous systems and how do we regulate and how do we create a space that helps our clients and our horses also regulate, because polyvagal theory is all about co-regulation, that we're all impacting one another. But one of the things that really stood out for me was a saying that they had of curiosity plus compassion plus communication is what equals connection. So I think that stood out for me because it helped kind of maybe put some form to what connection can be. And it was curiosity, compassion, and communication. And I love what you were really focusing in on there, Fred, was the listening aspect of communication.
And that may also be really valuable if horses are having a response to client energy and moving in a way that's unusual, which for a horse professional might be very uncomfortable at first, even if it's not unsafe yet. If our horses are doing things that are unpredictable, we are unsettled maybe first. And trying to move that into curiosity sooner instead of they never do that. What's up? You know, like instead of getting in sort of a parental role of trying to protect our herd, that shift to curiosity would be really helpful because and trusting them. I trust this is unusual, but you know what? Overall, I trust that this is relevant somehow, and I'm going to listen to them and try to figure it out. We had, you know, horses moving. It was a administrative group from a Catholic school, and they were struggling with being siloed through the pandemic. And when they went out to the space, they went to 4 corners of the arena and were reflecting their siloed story rather than what they were trying to get to. And we had horses, we had Juniper literally nudging the 1 horse person in the group and like pushing him with her nose. And he was a little like, I don't know what this is. This is bizarre. And we were uncomfortable. But she herded that group of people into a circle in the center of the arena when they started talking about the real stuff and realized, oh, this is what we've needed. We haven't stood together and talked for 1.5 years. And if I'd said, you know, bad horse, Juniper, you can't move that person like that, and got in there with an intervention, which really wasn't unsafe, it was uncomfortable. But somehow or another, the trust in her and what was happening and allowing that discomfort to move forward ended up being a very, very relevant part of their weekend. And I needed to trust that Juniper knew what she was doing, but it was definitely uncomfortable and it was different than how she was acting, you know, 10 minutes before or the morning of. So I think that's interesting to think about holding space, is that trusting our co-facilitators and recognizing that discomfort might be one of the ways they're telling a story. If the story is uncomfortable, the horses are likely to show it to you. And so I try to not have shut it down. I try to temper my try to not shut that down and be curious about it instead. Amanda?
I was going to say, that's such an ongoing practice. You know,
Yes.
that notion of being curious. We had a situation here just last week where we were introducing a new horse into the herd and had gone through all the precautions that one goes through, 2 weeks of trying to, separate them and let them get to know each other across the fence. And just very briefly, one of the things that happened as soon as we brought this new horse in is that Promise, who is one of our very, very sensitive herd members and has been the leader since Ben died, became very, very, very physically like quivering and very nervous and anxious. And at the time we thought, oh, she's responding, she's good to heat. I hesitate to admit it, but we sort of said, oh, she's just being Promise, which was a real error in our judgment. And long story short, what happened is that this horse that we thought was so perfect turned out to have a side that was very troubled. And he actually charged me and knocked me down very unexpectedly. And as soon as that happened, and as soon as we decided to remove him from the herd and return him to where he had come from, because he was a lease and they were going to work with him on this, Promise immediately calmed down because she had been agitated the whole time he was there. And I realized that Promise, I believe now, was probably trying to tell us something that we didn't know. And I wasn't listening to her in a way that was respectful. I was labeling her behavior. And it's caused me to really rethink all the wisdom, that they have and that they express to us, and that oftentimes I do things like that, not realizing, even though I really want to do better. So I share that as sort of a cautionary tale and a reminder that even though we are coming at it from a place of wanting to listen, sometimes our blindness just makes it impossible for us to do so.
Yeah, thank you for that share. And I think just to have compassion for that self-realization too. It's like, I doubt we ever get it on the first time. Whatever we learned from them, they told us once or twice before, at least.
Yeah.
So like, perfection isn't available, but if we're listening, eventually we get it. And so I think they appreciate that. And
Yeah.
so there's opportunities to take these insights and say, just what you're doing, having an awareness of, oh, look at that, I'm going to listen more.
Yeah. Pay more attention.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour. I don't know. See, some people are needing to leave. Are there other questions or comments or thoughts? I'm sort of jumping in, facilitating here, Fred. Sorry.
Appreciate it. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to,
Oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Ann.
Becky. No, go.
No,
go
I was this just brought to mind one of the horses I have, an Arabian. He is very sensitive. I'm always, and I kind of have that thing too, Amanda, like you did with the not labeling the horse, but saying, oh, well, that's just Mo, that's how he is, but I have an expectation sometimes that he's going to take his nose and use it to shove someone. And he does that. But I've noticed over time that, it's me that has the problem, not the horse, because he's very selective about when he does it. And he does it when someone is has a bullying type of behavior. Then he'll go over and he'll shove them with his nose. So it only happens when it needs to happen, is, what I've learned. So I trust him, and he has never knocked anybody down. But sometimes we need to just see those horses for who they are and trust what they will do, and they'll do what's needed.
And I also think it's the horse professional's role to determine which horses are good for sharing space with humans in a client setting without a fence between them. And so, because we do need a certain agreement about ground rules and kind boundaries, and we there's a certain amount of, we need to have mutually agreed upon ground rules for how horses and humans interact. So if a horse isn't there yet, we can choose to not include them in sessions or not include them in loose horse sessions without separation. That's part of we're the ones that understand that path. And I think holding space gives us room to do that without labeling them as good or bad, but just saying they're either ready for in-person sessions, or perhaps we're going to do it a little differently with them, right? So we can adapt rather than judge, but we are the ones who are determining which horses are in the space with humans, and we can do that with an understanding of their readiness for behavior.
Yeah, for sure.
Because not all horses are going to be the right horses to be in that space.
Right, you have to be selective.
Well, thanks everybody for your attention. And we can wrap it up unless anybody's got final thoughts to share.
Well, I just want to thank you, Fred. It's, you've held space for us to learn about holding space so beautifully. So thank you.
Thank